Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. The current session focuses on sociolinguistic approaches to second language acquisition. I hope and expect by the end of this session, you would have an understanding of what is the significance of sociolinguistic approaches towards SLA. Well, my dear students, in order to understand what is the perspective that sociolinguistics takes on second language acquisition, I think we need to go slightly back into the history and we need to see the development of, various approaches through the times. The first approach that I would like you to focus on is contrastive analysis. In fact, the contrastive analysis approach was introduced in the backdrop of World War I, in the processes of, language learning. Anyhow, second language acquisition, when it comes to contrastive analysis, there are certain aspects that were focused on from contrastive analysis point of view. If we think of the development and growth of SLA, it is a relatively young research area that started in mid-20th century. And in fact, it was in 1940s and 50s that, according to contrastive analysis approach, it was thought that the major difficulties that any learner faces in learning L2 is because of the interference of, or because of the impact of L1. So, in the process of learning of L2, in the process of acquisition, I would say, of L2, L1 plays major role as a hindrance or as a support. However, soon it was realized through experimentations and through practical applications that the acquisition of second language is not majorly or significantly or only, I would say, a matter of the influence of L1. It is not only an issue of the comparisons and contrasts that this contrastive analysis made between L1 and L2. The basis of this contrastive analysis was that the teaching learning strategies that would be used for teaching L2, they would be based on, looking at the similarities between L1 and L2 and, differences in L1 and L2. So, for example, if two learners are learning, according to this contrastive approach, learning English language as L2, in that case, if learner A has German as, for example, L1, and if learner B, for example, has Urdu as L1, the cases would be different and the learning strategies would be different for both, because in case of learner A, comparison and contrast would be drawn between German and English. In case of learner B, comparisons and contrasts would be drawn between Urdu and English, and it would be seen how in each of the sets, each of these sets of languages, they, in terms of, various levels, such as phonology, morphology, syntax, vocabulary, etc., how they are similar and how they are different. And based on this contrastive analysis, the teaching learning process would take place. So this contrastive approach, however, had its own flaws which were realized, and it was realized that it is not only the language to language relationship. There are a lot of other factors that play a role in that. This led towards the next approach towards SLA, that is second language teaching. And in fact, error analysis was introduced as an approach. It was in 1971 that Corder, a full name is Pitt Corder, he, for example, claimed that in both FLA, that is first language acquisition, and SLA, that is second language acquisition, learners make errors. And according to this approach, in contrast to the previous approach, making errors was considered to be a sign of learning, because this is through the process of trial and error the learners learn a language. If you look at your own background, social and cultural situations, you can notice how children learn language. They speak it, they're never taught the rules, they speak it, they make mistakes or errors, and gradually they correct their own errors and they learn. So the same was applicable to second language acquisition or SLA as well, according to Corder. Now, when it comes to, in fact, the sociolinguistic account of SLA, the later half of the 1970s and the 1980s and 90s is particularly, and even until today, have witnessed the emergence of more social and pragmatic-oriented linguistic concerns with reference to language learning, with reference to particularly second language learning. So, social aspects are more incorporated into the process of SLA. According to Firth and Wanger, for example, 1997, second language acquisition research was too dominated by psycholinguistic thinking before this. So, this was a call for research which made sense in the socially embedded experience of L2 speakers. So, Firth and Wanger proposed that the social context or the social experience of language, is significant from the learner's perspective, especially when it comes to SLA. So, sociolinguistically oriented research on second language since Firth and Wagner has continued, and today a holistic, approach from the sociolinguistic point of view is taken when it comes to SLA. It is argued that sociolinguistic approach should be central to socially oriented SLA research. Why? Because it would provide insights into the social, the cultural based reasons of why different aspects of language, why different structures of language, etc. are used in a certain way, and how a learner in a particular social environment would be able to use them. Well, in the recent times, over the last couple of decades, substantial progress has been made in developing a model of sociolinguistic processes that inform the process of second language acquisition. This model is supported by empirical evidence, and it shows that learners' input and processing of L2 input in different social contexts is socially mediated. Now, this term is significant for you. Socially mediated. All the input of language that comes in, all the exposure that is given to L2, this is not only, strictly speaking, a directly coming exposure of or input of L2. Rather, it is mediated, in this process, socially it is mediated, which means social factors work around it as it reaches, the second language learner. This means social and linguistic contexts affect linguistic use, choice, and development, and that learners intentionally assert social identities through SLA. So, the issue of language identity or sociolinguistic identity cannot be separated from the issue of SLA. A strength of sociolinguistic approach to SLA research is that its strong focus on linguistic outcomes, tracking the impact of contextual procedures or the factors that lead this input to create the SLA output. Well, my dear students, to conclude, what I would say is that Preston 2000 and 2002 and Fasold and Preston 2006 provided a central sociolinguistic framework to integrate research on the interaction of social factors and cognitive processes that play a significant role in SLA. So I hope this historical context of development of different approaches from the sociolinguistic perspective in SLA would have given you an understanding of how sociolinguistics provides a socially oriented perspective on second language acquisition.